Welcome to part 2 of the seed cone scavenger hunt. First, can you all take a big breath with me? Did you know that every breath you take comes from trees and other plants? We breathe in the air that trees breathe out, and trees breathe in the air that we breathe out. We're so connected to trees, and that's one of the reasons I love learning about them. So you might want to have the cones you collected in front of you as you watch the rest of this video to learn more about them.
Oh, hello. I'm wondering if you may have found a teeny tiny little cone that looks like this. It's kind of so small that it looks like a piece of a cone, or maybe a tiny little wooden flower. And this cone is from a cedar tree. And something that's unique about a cedar tree is if you look closely, they look a little bit more like scales, like the scales of a fish, so different than the needles of a tree. And this is a western red cedar. And you might also recognize a cedar tree from the bark. The bark is kind of flat, and it looks like it's peeling off a little bit. So it's a unique characteristic of the cedar. And in the valley, we also have yellow cedars, but I don't know if we're going to get to see one of those today. But this is a western red cedar cone.
Did you find a cone that looks like this? This is the biggest seed cone we have here in Whistler, and it comes from our western white pine tree. If you want to find this tree, look for a tree that has needles with bunches of 5.
So you might have found this cone, which is one of the smallest ones in the valley, but it belongs to the most common tree, so you've probably found a lot of these. The tree it comes from is this western hemlock, and there's a story that goes that back when Mother Nature was giving out cones, she asked all the trees to line up, but the hemlock came late and it butted to the front of the line, but was caught, so Mother Nature sent him to the back of the line. So in the end, the hemlock ended up getting the smallest cones, and to this day, it hangs its head in shame. So when you look at the tree from a distance, you can see that the very top of the tree bends right over like it's hanging its head in shame.
Okay. You may have found a cone that looks like this. And if you feel it, it feels a lot more like paper than it does. It's not really woody like the other ones. And hold it up to your ear. It's really fun. It makes a fun sound. Another unique characteristic about the cone is if you look really closely, you will see it has kind of like jagged edges on it. So that's a beautiful thing about this tree. Another unique characteristic about the tree is that it's kind of prickly on the ends. So if you go to like shake hands with this tree, you're going to notice it's prickly. And needle itself is kind of round. The other ones are flat. If you're taking a close up look at the needles, so these have round needles that are spiky or prickly. And also, if you get a close up look at the bark, kind of looks like cereal if you use your imagination.
This seed cone is the only one that has little tags on each scale. If you look at it and you use your imagination, you might see that the little tags look like the back feet and tail of a little mouse. To help you remember this tree, there's actually a really nice story I can tell you. And it goes a little bit something like this. A long, long time ago, there was a big fire in the forest, and all the little mice were running away, trying to hide and escape. And the big Douglas fir said, "Hello, little mice. I can save you. If you climb up my bark and crawl into my cones, you'll be safe from the fire." And the fire came, and the mice were hiding in the cones, and they all survived because Douglas firs have very thick bark that can help it survive in a fire.
Okay, so for this cone, this is going to be one of the hardest cones to find. It's from this tree here, and this is called a silver fir. Now, why you might not be able to find the cones is that, unlike other cones, they actually stick straight up at the very top of the tree. And instead of falling down all in one piece, the cones actually, here's an example, each of the little bits falls off one by one. So in the end, you're just left with this sticking up at the top of the tree and a bunch of scales on the ground. So the reason we found these cones here, these are little parts of the cones, is that an animal like a squirrel or a chipmunk would have chewed them down, and then that's how they ended up intact on the forest floor. So to find the tree that these cones come from, look for the one that has smooth bark, but with these little bubbles in here, and they're sap bubbles. And sometimes they're leaking sap, and you can give them a good smell, and they're one of the best smelling trees. Also, if you look at the needles, they are flat, and if you look very, very carefully at the end of the needle, it has a little notch in it, which some people think looks like a bum.
This cone here, the seed cone, is a lodgepole pine. So it's identifiable by the needles are in bunches of two. So if you look really closely, the needle is in a group of two there. It's a tall and skinny tree, and it's called lodgepole pine. It's quite interesting because they actually make telephone poles. There's one right beside it in the background. You can see it's tall and skinny, just like the lodgepole pine tree. And what's neat about the lodgepole pine this time of year is if you tap this little guy here, I don't know if you can see that, that's pollen. You see that? Just coming right out of there.
This is actually a bonus tree. If you find these tiny little seed cones, they actually belong to this special tree called an alder. The alder is different from all the other trees we found because it has leaves that turn yellow in the fall and then they fall off over winter. Look for a tree with leaves that have a jagged outline like this.
Okay, now that you've gathered your seed cones, maybe line them all up. Do a little activity where you take a really close look at the different kinds of seed cones you got. You could break them into different groups by size, by shape, by color, probably mostly by size in this case. But if you take a really close look at some of them, you'll get to see the really unique identifying characteristics. So this one here, I don't really need the magnifying glass, but maybe you have one. And you can take a close look at those little mouse tails coming out of there. That's pretty awesome. So something you might want to do as well is if you have a notepad, do some drawing. Try and draw each of the cones. Write a story about the cones. You could give your cone its own name to help you remember it. That's a fun idea. Also, sometimes we like to make art with cones. So, you know, you can line them all up here. And once you've had some fun with the cones, whatever you end up doing with them, if you're no longer using them, the best thing to do is to put them back on the forest floor. And you never know, a little tree might end up sprouting out from one of these cones that you discovered today on your walk. So thanks for getting out there today. We've had a good time here, and we hope you've had a good time too.